My name is Cecilia Martinez. I was 51 years old the night my world cracked open in the most unexpected way. It was supposed to be a proud evening, my daughter Sophia's graduation. She had worked harder than anyone I knew, and being named valedictorian was the perfect reward for years of dedication. I stood in the hotel's glittering dining room in my navy dress, watching her beam as friends and professors congratulated her. The room smelled of champagne and roses, a night carved for joy. And then my husband shattered it. "I found someone younger and I'm leaving you," Daniel announced, his voice carrying across the clinking glasses and laughter. For a moment, silence stretched through the elegant room, sharp and heavy. Conversations froze, heads turned. I felt the weight of eyes on me, neighbors, co-workers, friends, all waiting to see if I would collapse under the blow. Daniel smirked, pleased with his timing, with his cruelty. He wanted the humiliation public, written on my face. For years, I had endured his late nights, his lies, his smirks when I asked too many questions. I had endured the whispers, the perfume on his suits, the bank charges that didn't add up. I had endured his arrogance, the way he belittled my job, my voice, my worth. Tonight, though, I felt no collapse, no tears rising, no panic, just something still, sharp, and resolute. I placed my glass on the table with deliberate calm. My heart pounded, but my voice when it came was steady, clear, and strong. "Actually, Daniel, that's perfect timing. I have an announcement of my own." I saw his expression falter, just a crack, but it was enough. He hadn't expected resistance. He had planned for my silence, my shock. Instead, I gave him fire disguised as composure. "I'm also leaving you," I said, my eyes never leaving his. "For someone younger. Much younger, actually." Gasps rippled through the room. I could feel the electricity shift, the crowd leaning closer. Daniel's smirk twisted into something harder. "Don't be ridiculous, Cecilia. Who would want a woman your age? You're delusional if you think you can do better than me." His words dripped poison, but they slid off me like rain on glass. I smiled, the kind of smile I'd perfected in boardrooms when men underestimated me. "His name is Mike Peterson," I said softly, but my voice carried. "Perhaps you know him. He's tall, brilliant, charming, and he happens to be your boss." The color drained from Daniel's face. His jaw slackened. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The man who had just stood so proud, so smug, now looked like he'd swallowed glass. Around us, the air vibrated with shock. I could hear the rustle of dresses, the shifting of shoes, the breathless whispers spreading like wildfire. Every eye in the room was on him now, not me. My daughter Sophia slipped her arm through mine, her presence like a pillar of strength. Her voice, steady and sure, cut through the tension. "Dad, Mom deserves better. We all know about your affairs. It's time she's happy." I looked at her, pride swelling in my chest. My brilliant daughter, my ally, was standing beside me in the moment I needed her most. For the first time in decades, I felt a surge of freedom ignite in my chest. And I knew this was just the beginning. Daniel's face drained of color as if the ground had just vanished beneath him. His confident smirk faltered, replaced by a twitch of panic he could not disguise. Around us, the hall fell silent. The clinking of silverware stopped, and whispers spread like sparks on dry grass. Every pair of eyes was on him. He had chosen this moment to humiliate me, but instead, he stood unraveling in front of his colleagues, friends, and his own daughter. I remembered all the nights when his contempt cut deeper than words. The times he laughed at me when I questioned his absences. The perfume clinging to his shirts. The receipts tucked carelessly in his jacket pocket. And when I found the courage to ask, he dismissed me as paranoid, jealous, too emotional. Tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, the evidence wasn't perfume or receipts. It was his own fear, written all over his face. Sophia's hand tightened on my arm. My daughter, strong and unflinching, faced her father without hesitation. "Dad," she said, her voice calm but steady enough to carry across the room. "Stop pretending. We all know." Her words cracked the silence, and a low ripple of gasps followed. Guests shifted uncomfortably, watching not a celebration but a spectacle. His spectacle. Daniel opened his mouth to bark back, but his voice betrayed him. "Lies," he spat, though it came out thin and fragile. "You think anyone believes you, Cecilia? You think Mike Peterson would want a woman like you?" His bravado rang hollow, brittle like glass seconds before it shatters. I tilted my chin slightly, meeting his glare with a calm that shook him more than anger ever could. "Mike values what you never did: intelligence, respect, and honesty. Qualities you never cared to see in me." My voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The truth filled every corner of the hall without force. The man who once controlled every conversation suddenly had no grip at all. Then Mike stood. The crowd hushed instantly. His presence carried weight, the kind Daniel had only ever tried to imitate. He walked forward with steady steps, his suit sharp, his eyes locked on Daniel. Stopping just behind me, he spoke in a voice clear and measured. "Actually," Mike said, "Cecilia isn't lying." Gasps rippled again, sharper this time. Daniel's jaw dropped, his body stiffening like a man awaiting a blow. Mike's gaze didn't leave him. "Cecilia's strategies secured millions in new business for our European branch. She is respected across the industry. And unlike you, Daniel, she knows the meaning of integrity." The words hit like stones. Guests glanced at each other, murmurs rising. Some smirked at the irony, others simply watched with fascination as Daniel's confidence collapsed. Beside him, Jennifer froze, the smugness fading from her face as realization set in. She wasn't standing with a powerful man anymore. She was standing with someone cornered and small. I let the silence linger before I stepped closer. "You've spent years shrinking me," I said, my tone steady, almost gentle. "But look at yourself. You're the one exposed. You wanted a spectacle, and here it is. Not my humiliation, Daniel. Yours." The murmur grew into a quiet storm of whispers. No one pitied him now. They pitied me for years. Tonight they saw who I really was, and who he had always been. Sophia leaned forward, her voice carrying with finality. "You tried to embarrass Mom. All you did was embarrass yourself." The words landed like a gavel in a courtroom. Daniel's shoulders sagged, his eyes darting around the room for rescue. But there was none. The applause he expected was gone. What remained was the undeniable truth, hanging over him heavier than any silence ever could. Daniel's shoulders slumped as though the weight of the room had pressed down on him all at once. The crowd, restless now, shifted in their seats, watching him shrink from the man he had pretended to be. His lips parted as if to recover control, but no words came. His voice, the same one that had boomed through countless dinners and lectures, was gone, stolen by truth. He looked small, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small beside him. I held his gaze, calm, unshaken. "For years," I said, my voice steady, "I believed I wasn't enough. I believed every cruel word you whispered when no one else could hear, that I was plain, that I was ordinary, that without you, I was nothing." The silence deepened, thick with the weight of every memory. "But look around, Daniel. Tonight proves what I should have known all along. I was never the one lacking. It was always you." Gasps and murmurs threaded through the air, an audience caught between pity and awe. Sophia stood taller beside me, her presence like an anchor. My daughter's hand in mine reminded me why I had endured so much for so long. But now, with her watching, I wanted her to see something different. I wanted her to see strength. Mike's voice cut in, firm but calm. Daniel, I've reviewed your record, missed deadlines, misconduct, the inappropriate relationship with a subordinate. You've damaged not just your reputation, but the company itself. And after tonight, I don't see how you recover from this. The words landed with brutal precision, each one stripping Daniel further of the false image he clung to. His eyes darted to Jennifer, but she was frozen in her seat, her face pale, her confidence shattered. She had signed up for the show of power, not the humiliation of collapse. You can't do this to me, Daniel whispered hoarsely, but it was a plea, not a demand. He was begging now, begging in front of everyone. The same man who once made me beg for scraps of respect. It was almost poetic. I stepped forward, close enough that he could see the calm in my eyes. I'm not doing this to you, I told him softly. You did it to yourself. Every cruel word, every lie, every betrayal. Tonight is just the moment the world sees what I've always seen. A hush fell as Daniel's hand shook against the wine glass he still held. For years I had imagined this moment. Me confronting him, me breaking down his walls with anger. But anger wasn't what filled me now. It was something sharper, cleaner, a satisfaction born of truth. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to break. I only needed to let him fall under the weight of his own arrogance. Sophia raised her voice once more, her words ringing with finality. You always said family came first, Dad, but you never acted like it. You taught me that words mean nothing without action. Tonight, your actions finally caught up with you. The crowd murmured in agreement, some nodding, others whispering to each other, their eyes locked on Daniel. He was cornered, no longer the powerful man commanding attention, but a fragile figure crumbling in the spotlight he himself had lit. I reached for my champagne glass, lifted it slightly, and spoke with quiet clarity. Here's to endings, I said, because sometimes endings are where freedom begins. And with that, I drank, the room still silent, the truth unshakable. Daniel had wanted to make a spectacle of me. Instead, he had created the stage where his own downfall played out in front of everyone who mattered. The clinking of my glass faded, and in the silence that followed, I realized something extraordinary. For the first time in 26 years, I wasn't the one left scrambling to hold the pieces together. Daniel was. He stood there, jaw tight, fists clenched, his face a swirl of anger, shame, and desperation. And the people he once impressed with his charm, the very audience he thought he owned, were now watching him with nothing but pity. Mike remained calm, unshaken, as though the entire scene had been expected. Daniel, he said evenly, tomorrow morning we'll schedule a formal review of your position at Velhorn. Until then, I suggest you reflect on the choices that brought you here. His voice carried the authority Daniel craved but could never earn. It was devastating in its simplicity. Daniel had spent years building a facade of control, and with one sentence, Mike reduced it to rubble. Jennifer's hand slipped off Daniel's arm. She avoided his eyes, her gaze fixed on the floor. The woman he had chosen over me wasn't reaching for him now. She looked like she wanted to disappear. And in that moment, Daniel looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Not because of what Mike or I had said, but because even the person he thought would stand beside him was already retreating. I turned slightly, meeting the stares of the other guests. Some were wide-eyed, others whispering behind hands, but I caught something else too. Respect, not pity. Respect. It was there in the way mothers nodded at me, the way fathers looked at Sophia with admiration. They saw strength where Daniel had expected humiliation. That quiet recognition was worth more than any apology he could ever give. Daniel finally spoke, his voice rough and strained. You think you've won, Cecilia? You think standing here embarrassing me makes you better? His words were a last defense, a flimsy shield. I stepped forward, refusing to let his bitterness pierce the calm I had earned. No, Daniel. I don't think I'm better because of this. I'm better because I chose myself, something you never thought I would do. The words settled heavy between us, and for once he had no response. Years of cruelty had left me doubting my worth, but tonight I understood clearly. Power didn't come from him. It never had. It came from me finally refusing to shrink. Sophia slipped her arm through mine again, steady and sure. "Let's go, Mom," she said quietly, her voice trembling but full of resolve. Around us, guests parted as we began to move, creating a path through the reception hall. I could feel their eyes following me, not in judgment, but in silent applause. And as I walked away from the man who had belittled me for decades, I realized I wasn't walking into uncertainty. I was walking into freedom. At the door, I paused, turning back for one last glance. Daniel stood alone, the life he had tried to stage manage collapsing around him. He looked lost, desperate for control he would never reclaim. For years, he had wanted me small, quiet, invisible. But tonight, I left him standing in the ruins of his own arrogance, and I walked out tall, unshaken, and finally free. The air outside the reception hall felt cooler, sharper, as if the world itself had shifted with my decision. Sophia and I walked side by side across the parking lot, her heels clicking against the pavement like a steady drumbeat of support. For so long, I had imagined freedom as something distant, a dream I could only reach if I endured just a little more, gave just a little more. But tonight, I realized freedom wasn't waiting for me. It had been mine all along. All I had needed to do was claim it. When we reached the car, Sophia turned to me. Her eyes, so much like mine, were glistening with unshed tears. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm proud of you." Just 4 words, but they wrapped around my heart like the embrace I had been starved of for years. I wanted to tell her everything, about the nights I cried quietly into my pillow, about the way Daniel's contempt had chipped away at me, about the lonely ache of feeling invisible. But instead, I simply held her hands and said, "I'm proud of you too." Because she had stood beside me tonight, unwavering, and in her courage, I saw the woman I had raised. At home later that night, after Sophia had gone upstairs to rest, I stood in the living room surrounded by silence. For years, silence had been painful. It had been the echo of neglect, the reminder of a marriage that gave me nothing but absence. But this silence felt different. It felt like possibility, like space that finally belonged to me. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat down by the window, and let the city lights blur into streaks as tears finally slid down my cheeks. Not tears of despair, but of release. Mike called shortly after. His voice was calm, steady, the way it always was. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "I'm more than all right," I replied. "For the first time in years, I'm exactly where I need to be." There was a pause, then his voice warmed. "You were incredible tonight, Cecilia. I've never seen anyone face down humiliation with such grace. Daniel didn't know what hit him." I smiled at that, a small, private smile that belonged only to me. For once, I wasn't performing. I wasn't holding my breath for approval. I was simply me, and it was enough. As the night deepened, I replayed the evening in my mind. Daniel's smirk fading into panic. Jennifer stepping back, abandoning the man she thought was powerful. Mike's quiet strength steadying me, and Sophia's hand gripping mine like an anchor. Each detail was a piece of proof that I had done the right thing. Not just for myself, but for my daughter. She had witnessed her mother refuse to shrink, refuse to be diminished. That example was worth more than all the years of compromise I had wasted. Before I went to bed, I pulled out a small notebook I had kept hidden for years, the one where I scribbled dreams I was too afraid to say out loud. Moving to Paris had once been a wild fantasy I tucked away between grocery lists and appointment reminders. Tonight, I wrote it boldly across the page. Paris. New life. New beginning. The words didn't feel fragile anymore. They felt certain as the dawn that was waiting to break. And for the first time in decades, I slept without fear of tomorrow, because tomorrow was mine to create. The morning light streamed through the curtains, painting the room in gold. For once, I didn't wake with the heaviness of dread pressing against my chest. Instead, I stretched, savoring the quiet realization that I had survived one of the hardest nights of my life. And I hadn't just survived, I had won. The first sip of coffee that morning tasted different, richer somehow, like victory poured into a cup. Sophia came down the stairs, her hair pulled into a loose bun, still in her pajamas. "Good morning, Mom," she said softly, her voice carrying both concern and admiration. She set 2 plates on the table and slid into the chair across from me. "You were amazing last night," she added. I smiled, though my throat tightened at her words. For so long I had worried about her, worried she would see only the broken version of me, the woman silenced by humiliation. But now, she had witnessed strength. She had seen me rise. As we ate, Sophia asked the question I knew was coming. What happens now? Her eyes searched mine, both hopeful and anxious. I took a deep breath, setting down my fork. "Now," I said, "we begin again. No more waiting for someone else to decide my worth. I'll move forward with the Paris opportunity. And you—" I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "You'll know that you don't have to settle for less than you deserve. Not ever." Sophia's eyes shimmered, and for the first time in years, we both laughed together over breakfast. It was the sound of freedom. Later that afternoon, Mike stopped by. He didn't arrive with grand gestures or dramatic declarations. He simply brought fresh croissants and that steady presence that had become my anchor. "Are you sure you're ready for this next step?" he asked, sitting across from me in the living room. His tone wasn't doubtful. It was respectful, as if he was giving me space to choose, not pushing me. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I'm done living in shadows. Paris isn't just a job, Mike. It's a chance to finally breathe." His smile was quiet but full of pride. "Then we'll make it happen." But of course, Daniel wasn't ready to let go. That evening, the phone rang. His name flashed on the screen, and for a moment, old instincts stirred, the urge to brace myself, to shrink. But I didn't. I answered, my voice calm. "What do you want, Daniel?" His tone was sharp, desperate. "You humiliated me last night. Do you have any idea what you've done? My reputation? My career?" I cut him off before he could spiral. "What you did, Daniel. What you chose. All I did was stop hiding it." Silence stretched on the line, and then his voice cracked. "You're throwing away everything we built." I almost laughed. "We didn't build anything together. I built, and you took. That ends now." When I hung up, I realized something profound. For the first time in 26 years, I wasn't afraid of Daniel anymore. His voice no longer had the power to make me small. He was just a man scrambling to hold on to control that had slipped through his fingers. And I was done giving him mine. That night, as Sophia studied upstairs and Mike worked on his laptop beside me, I opened my notebook again. Beneath the words I had written the night before, I added another line. "I am not his anymore. I am mine." The ink bled slightly into the paper, permanent and unshakable, just like the truth. And as the clock ticked softly in the background, I realized that freedom wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Sometimes freedom was as quiet as a deep breath in your own living room, knowing the worst was behind you, and the best was finally on its way. The days that followed moved quickly, almost too quickly. Calls from Paris came at odd hours, contracts were emailed, and meetings were scheduled with lawyers. The life I had once begged Daniel to protect was dissolving in front of me, but I wasn't mourning it. I was trading it in for something better, something I had built for myself. Sophia threw herself into helping me prepare. She researched apartments in Paris, bookmarked neighborhoods near my new office, and even practiced French phrases with me over dinner. Every evening, she reminded me of the promise I had made, to never settle for less again. Her excitement fueled my courage, and I saw in her eyes a reflection of the woman I was finally becoming. Daniel, on the other hand, spiraled. He sent long emails filled with accusations, alternating between anger and desperation. One message arrived at 3 a.m. "You can't just erase 26 years. I won't let you." I stared at the screen, the glow lighting up the darkness of my bedroom. For years, those words would have crushed me. But now, they sounded like nothing more than echoes from a man who had already lost. I didn't reply. Silence was my final answer. One evening, I attended a farewell dinner with my closest friends and colleagues. They toasted my new role, their glasses clinking in the soft light of the restaurant. "You've always had this fire in you," one colleague said, raising her glass. "It's about time the world gets to see it." I smiled, warmed by their support, but my thoughts drifted. For so long, I had been invisible, even to myself. And now, I was stepping into a life where invisibility was no longer possible. I wasn't just leaving Daniel. I was leaving the old version of me behind. Back at home, packing boxes lined the living room. Each item I placed inside felt symbolic. Books I had bought for inspiration, clothes I had worn during battles I fought in silence, photos of Sophia and me that told a story of resilience. There was no space for regret in those boxes, only reminders of survival. The night before my flight, Daniel showed up at the house uninvited. His knock was sharp, insistent. I opened the door, arms crossed, ready. He looked disheveled, his once polished suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. "You can't do this," he said, his voice breaking. "You can't just leave everything we had." I met his gaze steadily. "I'm not leaving everything. I'm leaving you." He flinched as if the words had cut deep. "And Paris?" he asked bitterly. "And him?" I didn't blink. "Paris is my future. And as for him, Mike sees me, Daniel. He respects me. That's more than you've ever done." The silence between us stretched like a chasm. For the first time, Daniel had no clever comeback, no cruel joke, no smirk to cover his shame. He just stood there, small and broken in a doorway he no longer belonged to. I closed the door gently, without slamming, without anger. It was over. And both of us knew it. Later that night, as I zipped up my final suitcase, Sophia came into the room and hugged me tightly. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm proud of you." My throat tightened, and I held her close. "I'm proud of me too," I whispered back. Those words felt strange and powerful, like a truth I had waited years to finally speak. When dawn came, I stood outside with my luggage, breathing in the crisp air of a new beginning. The taxi pulled up, the trunk opened, and as I slid into the back seat, I looked out at the house one last time. It wasn't just walls and windows. It was a battlefield, a place where I had once been diminished, but also where I had discovered my strength. And now I was leaving, not broken, but whole. As the car rolled forward, I whispered to myself, "This is not an ending. This is my beginning." And with that, I turned my eyes toward the horizon, toward Paris, toward freedom. The flight to Paris felt like a dream suspended in the clouds. As the city lights came into view from the plane window, I pressed my forehead against the glass, whispering to myself, This is real. This is mine. My old life was now an ocean away, and what lay ahead was something I had chosen, not endured. Mike was waiting for me at Charles de Gaulle, his tall frame easy to spot in the crowd. When our eyes met, the exhaustion of the journey melted away. "Welcome home," he said softly, pulling me into an embrace that felt both safe and liberating. For the first time in decades, I felt like I truly belonged. Our first weeks in Paris were a whirlwind. New apartment, new office, endless meetings with colleagues who looked to me not as someone's wife, but as a leader. Each day I walked into the glass-walled headquarters of Velhorn Global with a quiet pride, knowing I had earned my place there. Gone were the dismissive smirks, the belittling jokes. In their place there was respect, genuine and undeniable. At night, Paris unfolded itself like a gift. Mike and I would walk along the Seine, the golden glow of the city reflecting off the water. Sometimes we'd sit at small cafes, laughing over glasses of Bordeaux, talking about work, about dreams, about life. There was no pretense with him, no need to shrink myself to fit into someone else's shadow. With Mike, I wasn't invisible. I was radiant. But even as I settled into this new chapter, the echoes of Daniel's downfall reached across the ocean. Sophia called one evening, her voice calm but tinged with satisfaction. "Dad's been let go," she said. Apparently, the company couldn't ignore his behavior any longer. Mike's reports sealed it. I listened quietly, the corner of my lips curving into a smile. "And Jennifer?" I asked. Sophia chuckled. "She's gone too. Turns out loyalty built on lies doesn't last long." For the first time, I didn't feel bitterness, only closure. Still, Daniel wasn't done trying to claw his way back. Weeks later, a letter arrived at my office in Paris. The handwriting was unmistakable. I hesitated before opening it, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. Inside, his words poured out, a mixture of apologies, regrets, and half-hearted pleas. "I made mistakes, Cecilia, but we had a life together. You can't just erase me." I folded the letter neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and dropped it into the shred bin without another thought. Some chapters aren't meant to be reopened. Work became more than a career. It became my stage. Each successful project, each international partnership, reminded me of what I had always been capable of. My team admired my leadership. Clients valued my insight, and the world that had once overlooked me now sought my voice. And through it all, Mike stood beside me, not overshadowing, not controlling, simply supporting. That was the difference. He didn't define me. He amplified me. One night, after a particularly successful presentation in Berlin, Mike and I celebrated with dinner on a rooftop overlooking the city. The air was cool, the skyline glittered, and for a long moment, we sat in silence, simply taking it in. Finally, he turned to me and said, "Do you realize what you've done? You've turned years of pain into power. You've rewritten your story." His words hit me deeply. Because he was right. I had taken humiliation, betrayal, and years of being dismissed, and transformed them into fuel for something extraordinary. As I looked out at the city lights, I felt the weight of my past fall away completely. I wasn't the woman Daniel tried to diminish. I wasn't the wife who begged for scraps of respect. I was Cecilia Martinez, European Director of Marketing at one of the world's most powerful firms, a woman loved, respected, and finally free. And in that moment, I made myself a promise. I would never again let anyone write my story for me. From now on, every chapter would be mine, and mine alone. Months passed, and Paris began to feel less like an escape and more like destiny. Every corner of the city seemed to mirror my transformation. The woman who once cried alone in her Denver kitchen was gone. In her place stood someone unshaken, unafraid, and finally whole. But life has a way of testing the strength you've built. One rainy afternoon, as I left the office, I spotted a familiar figure across the street, soaked, disheveled, clutching a suitcase. Daniel. For a second, I froze, wondering if my mind was playing tricks on me. But no, it was him. His arrogance was gone, replaced by desperation. He crossed the street quickly, nearly tripping over himself, and stood in front of me with eyes that were no longer filled with superiority but with fear. "Cecilia," he rasped, water dripping down his face. "Please, I need your help. I've lost everything." I studied him quietly. His tailored suits had been replaced by a wrinkled coat. His voice, once booming with false confidence, now cracked under the weight of defeat. For years, I had dreamt of this moment, the day Daniel would finally understand what it meant to be powerless. Yet standing there, I didn't feel triumph. I felt distance, as if I were looking at a ghost of someone I once knew. "You made your choices," I said evenly, my umbrella shielding me from the storm that drenched him. "And you told me exactly what I was worth to you, nothing." My words cut cleanly, not with anger, but with truth. He grabbed my arm, his voice trembling. "Cecilia, I have no job, no savings. Jennifer left me. The company blacklisted me. I don't know what to do. You're the only one I have left." The irony stung. For years, I had been the one reaching out to him, begging for kindness, for recognition, for love. And now here he was, stripped bare, begging me for the very compassion he had denied me. But I had nothing left to give. Mercy wasn't mine to offer anymore. "Daniel," I said softly, pulling my arm free, "you still don't understand. I'm not your safety net. I'm not your wife. And I'm not your future. You destroyed all of that with your own hands." The traffic light turned green. Cars honked impatiently, headlights cutting through the rain. I stepped back onto the curb, watching as the city swallowed him into its chaos. His figure blurred in the storm until he was nothing more than a shadow fading away. That night, sitting by my Paris window with a glass of wine in hand, I thought about the encounter. Once, it would have consumed me, his words, his desperation, his pain. But now, it was just another reminder of how far I had come. Daniel's fall was no longer my burden. His story no longer had the power to shape mine. I turned to my journal, the same one where I had once scribbled notes of hurt and anger, and wrote a single line. "The past may knock on your door, but you don't have to let it in." When Mike came home later, I told him what happened. He listened silently, then took my hand in his. "You don't owe him anything," he said firmly. "You've already given enough." And as I looked into his eyes, I realized something profound. Revenge hadn't just been about exposing Daniel's lies or watching him crumble. It had been about reclaiming myself, about refusing to be defined by his cruelty. Daniel's downfall was complete. Mine was just the beginning of a new life I had written for myself. The morning sun spilled across the Paris skyline, casting long golden shadows over the city I now called home. From my balcony, the rooftops gleamed like a promise of everything I had built after breaking free. For the first time in decades, I wasn't waking up in someone else's story. This life, this peace, this power, it was mine. Daniel was nothing more than a chapter I had already closed. I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't need to. Hatred requires energy, and I had none left to waste on him. What I felt was something quieter, deeper. Indifference. And indifference, I realized, is the sharpest revenge of all. He could scream, beg, or fade into obscurity. But I wouldn't turn my head to watch. My eyes were fixed firmly forward. Mike came out to join me, coffee in hand, his presence calm and steady. He didn't need to fill the silence with words. He simply placed a hand on my shoulder, and that was enough. Love, I discovered, isn't loud. It doesn't demand. It doesn't crush you into something smaller. Real love creates space. Space to breathe, to dream, to stand tall. With him, I wasn't surviving. I was living. As Sophia visited on weekends, her laughter filling our Paris apartment, I saw in her the strength I had hoped to give her. She had watched her father fall and her mother rise, and she carried that lesson with her, that no one gets to decide your worth except you. The greatest gift I could give her wasn't money or status, but proof. Proof that even after betrayal, after humiliation, after years of being unseen, you can reclaim your voice and write a new story. One evening, as the Eiffel Tower lit up against the night sky, Sophia asked me, "Mom, do you ever regret it? Staying with Dad so long, letting him hurt you the way he did?" I thought about it, really thought. The easy answer would have been yes. But life isn't that simple. "I don't regret it," I told her. "Because if I hadn't endured what I did, I wouldn't have learned how strong I really am. I wouldn't have found this life, or this love, or the freedom to be myself. Sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most beautiful places." She smiled, her eyes bright. "Then I guess you won in the end." And she was right. I had won, not by destroying Daniel, but by refusing to let him destroy me. Looking out at the city lights, I whispered to myself, revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's walking away with your head held high, while they drown in the storm they created. That truth settled in my heart like a final, steady beat, the closing note to a symphony I had orchestrated with patience and resolve. Daniel had once tried to define me as ordinary, as replaceable. But here I stood, extraordinary in my own survival, irreplaceable in my own story. And that was the sweetest revenge of all. Because in the end, justice didn't roar. It whispered. And sometimes, whispers echo louder than screams.